Thank you very much, Christina. First, I have to say that I'm obviously extremely grateful to the organizers, to you, Christina, to Wagner, to all the team who prepared this great conference, which is a great success, I think. But in my case, it's not without some emotion that I accepted, as you mentioned, your most kind invitation. Not without emotion, since actually I feel being here in a room where my master, my professor, the one who changed my life in a way, because I didn't grow up with numismatics in mind as a teenager. And then it was only at the university that Tony Atkins, you have Tony Atkins on the screen. Yes, it's you, Beatrice. So it's, that's Tony Atkins. Let me discover these wonderful kind of artifacts and what we can do with that. And Tony Atkins was, I think, very instrumental to inoculate the taste for ancient numismatics in Brazil, and especially in São Paulo. And when I mean instrumental, it's all due to Beatrice Lorenzano, who spent some time in my university, which was the university where I did my studies, Louvain-la-Neuve. It was a new campus at that time. It was created in the middle of nowhere on ancient maps. It was called Little Siberia. And Beatrice accepted to spend sometimes substantial time in Little Siberia, called now Louvain-la-Neuve. And
I wasn't aware.
You was not aware, but it was Little Siberia. And then here is a tribute Beatrice wrote when Tony Atkins died prematurely, because he died before he was 60. He had a very, very, very demanding and energetic. He was a very energetic character, but he was working too much, I think, just that. And what Tony Atkins did, and that's the reason why I choose this topic for this lecture, is that he consciously gave as topics for PhD, topics of numismatic topics at the intersection between the Greek world and the Roman world. So every time the Greeks fought the Romans, or the Romans fought the Greeks, he gave a PhD. He started with Patrick Marchetti, with the Histoire économique de la Deuxième Guerre punique. Then came Beatrice with un PhD, monnaie et circulation monétaire en Grande Grèce durant l'expédition de Pyrrhus. Then came my PhD, and then there was also another PhD, and I could add the Achaean League with Maria Lakakis. So it was really not the premonition, but really intentional just to focus on wars, numismatics and wars, and numismatics between the Greeks and the Romans. It's a program. And I feel immensely fortunate just to have received, it was not my choice, just to have received as a topic the Mithridatic Wars. It's the Mithridatic Wars, as you will see, is the best case study we can have to really study the rhythm of production, the volume of production. I mean, it's wonderful. At that time, so let's say in the 70s, in the 80s, a big book which made some impression, and in a very assertive tone, was certainly the Roman Republic coinage, published by Michael Crawford in '74. And for Roman Republican coinages, as you see, that's what is in red. It's really strong in his statement. It may at first sight seem misleading to record in the table only the annual cost of the army, but this was, in my view, the only major annual expenditures. Below on the left, nothing suggests that this was ever issued for any other purpose than to provide the means for state expenditures. So it was really a very, very strong link between coinage and state expenditures. Obviously, it was not it prompts a reaction, and the reaction is also, actually that's the most quoted numismatic paper in the full literature about numismatics. That's the paper of Chris Argego, Why Did Ancient States Strike Coins? And Chris did produce a long list of other purposes, not military expenditures. So, and of course, not all coins were produced for military expenditures. It will be really, systematism is never a good thing, and we can think to many different purposes to start with bribes, certainly, but Chris put a long list with building an aqueduct and very discrete purposes. But that's a long list of other things, but it doesn't give you the proportions. At the same time, and that's for, I'm not moving from the Roman Republican or the Roman coinages or just to focus on Greek coinages. And at the same time, or nearly at the same time, it was published in 84, you had the first paper which systematically focused on Greek coinages and wars. And Colin Cray produced a list. And if you look at the list, that's a list of 16, actually it's more than 16 coinages. You will recognize some, the Cycloponic, Christina, that's number 3. We have different things. You see, a lot of gold. Kenneth Jenkins was really the man for gold Greek coinages, as we know with his, not among others, his dye studies for Carthage, electrum and gold. And you see, there is a mix, but this list could be not doubled, not tripled, not quadrupled, could be multiplied by a factor 10, a factor 15 today. It's really a first very, very short list of coinages which are most obviously, let's say, because you can have a legend just like in the camp, so that's very explicit. And you see that it's not only for kings or leagues, but also for cities. So at that time already, the idea that you can have a city producing coins for military purposes. Of course, it was already in the mind of our predecessors, but I will insist mainly on that. So now I'm going to make it to refresh the minds with a very short but very large flashback. You have to remind that in the 19th century, coins were supposed to have been produced for temples for a simple reason. 95, if not 99% of the iconography is referring to gods, goddesses, or to religious purposes. And so Thomas Bergen was the one, and then Ernst Curtius, a big, that's the Altertumwissenschaft. That's here, Bergen. That this motif is very often religious is indeed so evident that it has been necessarily admitted by everyone. But as the view intended to be developed in these pages recognizes no other mode of interpretation, it now becomes necessary to explain that view as briefly as possible. And so you have the different, the general explanation of Thomas Bergen. And then Curtius, Ernst Curtius, with these in bold characters here, this strong statement, the gods were the first capitalists. In Greece, their temples were the earliest banks. So just have in mind that in the 19th century, Greek coins were supposed to have produced mostly or only for gods, for temples. And it was mainly, the reaction came mainly from the island, David, from England, and with Percy Gardner, for example, in his book, The Types of Greek Coins, an archaeological essay, is writing after the Persian Wars, he wrote, "We have greater variety in the type of coins and a far greater variety of choices in their motives, gradually makes its way. They do not as yet cease to be religious in character, but no longer belong at all exclusively to the one deity who is the head of a city." We are passing from coins for the temple, coins for the gods, to something which has been explicitly described and argued by Bergen and Curtius, to something which is not explicitly found in past literature, but which is really the background of the thinking, which is coins for trade. It comes really during from England, from the 20th century. Barclay had here writing the sacred emblem of the god was, that's very important to have in mind. Why the iconography, why the religious iconography on Greek coins? Mainly because the main concept with coinage is trust, and you have to seal the transaction with some superior, with a superior guarantee, and gods are good for that. So I will pass possibly quickly on what George MacDonald or William Ridgway wrote about. But with William Ridgway, of course, we are on our way to a trade explanation. But what really, 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 in my mind, was a decisive, it's the decisive factor which provoke a shift paradigm between the 19th and the 20th century. Coins for gods, coins for trade is really the mainstream economics. It's really the fact, it's the importance given by all the main economists, could be, and Karl Marx, but also John Maynard Keynes, John Galbraith, more recently. They all said, they all insist about the two passages here. You have just one of Aristotle saying that first we have barter, then coinage was created to facilitate transactions, which numismatists thinks it's a confusion between cause and effect. There is no numismatist, to my mind, that will accept that. Coins were not created to facilitate exchange. There is no case for that. I don't see any case, convincing case for that. But of course, if Aristotle is, but coins were at a certain point, they had to be accepted and for some transactions. And of course, Aristotle is not writing that to mislead us. So it means that at the end, in the second part of the 4th century BC, Aristotle considered that it was the cause of the birth of coinage. And so let's say that the 20th century was around the middle of the 20th century. It was really something which is, if you have big coins, gold coins, big silver denominations, that's for international trade. If you have small coins, small denominations in silver or bronze coinages, that's for the daily transaction. The way of thinking. And this way of thinking, I think, is, it doesn't explain why coins were produced. It could explain why it fits with how coins were used, but not why coins were produced. This is to confound effect for causes. I'm not sure it's good English. Coins were used for transactions, but not created to facilitate them. And there is no, and that's very important, there is no mechanism to explain how new coins could have entered into the circulation to facilitate transactions. And there is no literature about that. So, trade is not the only argued cause for the strike of coinage, and I pass just in review and quickly other causes. One has been to say, okay, state expenditures, but state expenditure is not only military. For example, if you build a new city, you need that's state expenditures possibly, and so you need coinages to pay for all the contractors, all the materials and the buildings and so forth. And that's the explanation argued by Richard Ashton for roads. Since you see there is a peak at the very beginning. Is it okay with? Yeah. There is a peak just here at the very beginning, at the foundation of roads. There is another peak which is clearly linked with Macedonian wars. Nobody is discussing that. But Richard thinks that the first peak has to be linked with the construction of roads. Actually, I have a different explanation. I think it's not. But what is important to notice is that it works. It possibly works for roads. I don't think so, but it doesn't work for Alexandria. And for some cities, it's exactly the opposite. It means that it's exactly when we do have an ambitious program of public buildings, as in Thasos or Poseidonia, that we don't have coins. So it's not that we don't have a connection, it's that we have the inverse connection. Another case often argued, but mainly for and only for Athens, for Athens, is to link coinages with democracy. I think that it's really Athenian coinages has been dealt with mostly by the Americans, because the Agora is an American excavation, and the trade explanation and the democracy is in the mind. But if you look at the volumes, and that's what recently David Pritchard has published repeatedly, and what Andy Meadows wrote in a paper, which a bit shamefully has not been published yet, it doesn't fit. I mean, if you quantify, and that's the reason why it's important to quantify, not because you think that your number is the right number, but it gives you an order of magnitude, and there are some purposes which are simply impossible. And for Athens, democracy is nothing. It's 200 talents out of thousands and thousands. So just to remind that we are living in all systems since the First World War. The welfare state was created by Bismarck and in Germany before the First World War, but we are living in countries with a welfare state after let's say the First World War. But now we are accustomed with public expenses where war defense is only a minor percentage of all the expenses, but that was, as far as you are going before the 19th century, it's never the case. It means that it's with very few exceptions. It's not only for empires or kingdoms, but also for cities. The city of München, the city of Augsburg, the city of Paris, the city of Milano. If you look at the expenses in the 16th, 17th, 18th century, it was to pay for the garrisons, the ramparts, for military purposes. That's what was famously, for the first time, officially advertised to everybody by the French Minister of Finances under Louis XV, Necker, with his aperçu de l'administration des finances de la France, and actually les dépenses militaires constitute the leonine part of that. And it's well known also that values which are often published, when Richard Duncan Jones tried to estimate, to give some proportions for the Roman public expenditures, you see that there is an optimistic or a pessimistic scenario. But in any case, military purposes, the army will constitute at least more, and it's not, the percentages are not given here, but it's as a very minimum, it's at least 70%, which makes sense with what we can have for other culture. Then back to Greece. We do have, with a police project, we do have a wonderful list for the classical world with 1,000 cities, 982, never mind. If you look at this index, and with Louis Brousseau, we are on the point, we are involved to produce a very detailed list for coinages. It has been produced, but badly to my mind, by Josh Ober. It has to be done much more in a much more detailed way. It turns out that out of 1,000 cities, there are only 400 for which we do have a coinage. Out of these 400, there is only most of these 400 just for coins for once or twice, or during the 6th century, during the archaic, classical, and Hellenistic times, and coinages with at least one strike every century. Not even 40. I mean, let's say 40, 50 cities, and even just remind that even the Athenian mint, with the mint of Athens, was closed most of the time during the 3rd century. And rarely open, actually, so it gives you the measure of how coinage in the Greek world was ephemeral. And that's a general scenario, and you see here, we already did the job for the western part of the
Greek world. But what is really interesting is just to see chronologically, just to fit chronologically. And then you see that for the Cyclades, in southern Aegean Sea, you have here all the island, Callataÿ, Cyprus, and so forth. You have the chronological dates given by Oliver Hoover in his conspectus of all the Greek chronologies, and you see that actually chronologies and the Cyclades, it's mainly and mostly and nearly only during the period 520 to 480. We have to be more accepting Melos, but Melos it's an exception, and Tinos is not sure. And then there is a renewal and a brief, short one at the beginning of the 2nd century. So in other words, that's a full landscape for which we do have an intensive strike for 40 years, and then nothing for more than 2 centuries. And I took the Cyclades, but often, and that was a reference to Tony Atkins, La Numismatique des Ensembles, you have to consider landscapes. It's often a carnage. Most of the time, it's not isolated, but it functions inside a broader picture. Such an ephemeral pattern strongly ruins one, the link with trade, which is supposed to be much more even and stable through time. The possibility of free minting, where any citizen could convert his precious metals into coins against a fee of his own initiative, and the link with public buildings, democracy, and in general with any form of regular payments. Coinages in Greek world were not produced in a regular way. On the opposite, such an ephemeral pattern points to exceptional circumstances for current production with military expenditures as we have to complete or best guess affair. Now what I would, so that's a mise en bouche. Now what I would like to present briefly is the main results of my PhD, the one given by Tony Atkins of the Mediatic Wars. Why it's so wonderful to have worked on that chronology is that the chronologies of Mediatic are dated not only by year but by month. That's unique. It's not absolutely unique. We have Athens, we have Parthians, but then for Athens we are not sure about the sequence, and for the Parthians we know the sequence, we know the year, we know the month, but we know nearly nothing about the historical record. Mithridates fought extensively against the Romans. We know we have the rhythm of production on one side, and we have the historical record on the other. And when you put together these historical records with the production, it gives that kind of graphs. It means with ups and downs, and all the ups are linked with wars. But be careful. It's not we are making a war, so we will produce a lot of damage. Actually, that's 2 examples. So Mithridates fought twice extensively. There is a second so-called second Mithridatic war, which was nearly not. But for the first Mithridatic war, if he issued a lot of coins just before to enter into war. So during the last 2 months before to enter, and we know by literary sources that he was provoked by the Romans, and he only prepared himself at the last moment, and then he invaded the kingdom. That's one more. And as he was defeated for the first Mithridatic war, but he was defeated, but Sylla was not, he has no cavalry, he had a serious problem of legitimacy in Rome. He knew that he had to go back to Rome as soon as possible, so he left Mithridates with decent conditions. And so Mithridates has to pay his troops, his mercenaries. And so we have a peak after that, but then we have other coinages just to pay after the end of the First War. And for the Third War, that's the peak you have here, it's different. We have during 2 years before he enters into campaign, we have an extensive, massive carnage. And the reason is pretty clear. In 2 years before to enter into campaign, the last king of Bithynia, Nicomedes IV, died, giving his kingdom to Rome as a legacy, just like Attalus III did for Pergamon. And so and the Romans were the neighbor of Mithridates, and in the line of Mithridates there was no way. So you see that it's not, you can strike before the war, after the war, rarely during the war, because during the war that's different. And if you are looking to the months for Mithridates, you see that the most represented months are summer, or just May and June, actually, just late spring, beginning of summer, which is exactly the time where troops used to enter into campaign. And on the opposite, the least represented is our winter with January and March. It's not that. And then also you have, if you pay attention more precisely, for example, you see here that in between November 90 and February 89, there is nothing. Actually, there is a dialing between this one and this one. There is nothing. Or we know that he took advantage of the winter just to build a big fleet during that time. But that's a purpose, just to build a fleet without any tonnage. On the opposite, you have here the most extensive moment for Mithridatic strikes just in May and June 89. Okay, so just to sum up the results and playing a bit with an average, trying to propose amounts of coins in terms of real coinages, so how many coins were used. The important thing is not that. The important thing is that we have an asymmetric relationship. Yes, nearly all coinages, Mithridatic coinages, were used for military purposes. But no, most of the military purpose, most of the needs of the army were not paid in fresh coins. There is not enough. It's a difference of magnitude, of order of magnitude. There is not enough. And so then, that's for the full Mithridatic wars, and you have different ways to argue along that line. Coins are mostly for mercenaries. It's not my aim to extrapolate and to be systematic. Afraid to be systematic, but for Mithridates, at least, it works very, very well. The coinage of Mithridates is not the only one to be dated. It's not the only one for which we do have exactly the same pattern. For Ariobarzanes, the kings of Cappadocia, who was silly enough to choose as a Philoromaios, we see that there are two peaks, and these two peaks, counts are dated by year, but not by month. And you see that these two peaks are exactly correlated with the presence of Roman legions in the area. Once for the so-called Second Mithridatic War with Murena, using Cappadocia as a real basis and military there, and the other one when Pompey finished his war against the pirates, and he also stayed in Cilicia and Cappadocia. For Sistophoric coinages, but in Ephesus was the capital of the Roman province of Asia. We do have also three peaks, three moments which could be linked with the wars and the preparatives made by the Romans, and certainly the last one, 69, 66, 67, for which we know that Lucullus wintered in Ephesus with his army. But even for coinages like Arados and Laodicea along the Phoenician coast, in modern Syria now,
you see that when Pompey was in the area with his troops, we have a peak in both cities. It's not that spectacular, but it gives you the idea, and that's an idea that we can demonstrate very convincingly, and I will do that in a moment, that the Romans were not embarrassed to take advantage of an existing coinage just to pay their troops. It's important to quantify because sometimes you have results. Again, it's not for the pleasure just to quantify and just to say it's my number. No, but it's just to give some proportion. If you look at the late posthumous Lysimachie struck at Byzantium, beta Upsilon under the throne, somewhere here, it's the groups struck in 1980s. It's difficult to say, but it's gigantic. It's really, that is more than what the full Seleucid Empire used to strike at its peak under Antiochus III or Antiochus IV. So very clearly a problem here. It's not linked with the needs of Byzantium. And that's exactly the place where the Thracian mercenaries had to go back, had to pass going back to Thrace. And actually, I just published recently another strike of a tetronyme of Byzantium over a kind of Mithridates, which is both a very important thing. With Mithridates, we do have coinages for cities. I mean, apparently they are from cities because they have the name of cities: Amisos, Sinop, Tolara, Gaziura, Pimolissa, and so forth, Amastris, Pharmakeia. But if you look at that, and they have the same types. But two of these are not cities. If you take the Barrington Atlas, if you take, the literature, they are not cities. They are just fortresses. So, in this case, you do have clearly pseudo-civic issues. I don't know if this very old ad for Canada Dry says something to you or if it's really something really obsolete now, but when I was young, it was like the advert was Canada Dry. It had the color of alcohol, the taste of alcohol, but did not contain alcohol. These pseudo-civic coinages have the fabric of civic coinages. They have the names, the onomastic of civic coinages, but they are not civic coinages. They were struck for a higher level of power. And that bronze coinages have been produced for garrisons is actually, we don't have to be mechanic again, that's the third time, but it fits rather well in many circumstances where you do have gold and silver coinages for an army in movement and bronze coinages for garrisons, which makes sense also, because gold, for an army in movement, we know that in Plotus, for example, it's said that every soldier had his money on his belt in Zona. And Selene Psoma published a paper with several cases. We may think to the Ptolemies in the Peloponnesus or in Attica. There are also the garrisons of Antigonus Gonatas in Eubea, in Attica. We do have a wonderful case in Yambol, in Kabyle, near Yambol in modern Bulgaria. There was a Seleucid garrison there. We know that the garrisons stayed for 15, 20 years, no more. All the coins are from, and then these coins are found in archaeological context 2 centuries after, meaning that they form the bulk of the coin circulation for very long after the departure of the garrison. Then, and I'm progressing in my lecture, what I did a couple of years ago, and that it has been published now, it's try to say, okay, I will just focus on one chronological broad period, which is 150 BC, and a very broad and a large geographical zone area, which is continental Greece with northern Greece included. And just to try to estimate all the coinages struck at that moment during a century, and just to see what is military and what is not. And you will see nearly everything is military. Not in terms of monetary mass, it means in terms of value, not in terms of items, in terms of coins, because of coins, there are a lot of bronze coins which may have not been military, but in terms of value, they represent very, very, very little. So starting with the coinages for the late Hellenistic tetronymes of Thasos and Maronea, now recognized by everybody, I suppose, as having been issued to pay the Roman auxiliaries, the Thracian Roman auxiliaries. I'm going a bit further. Dyrrhachium and Apollonia, of course. But these, just like Thasos and Maronea, these coinages were not created by the Romans. They were created before. But at a certain point, and the bulk of the coinage is heavily used by the Romans. And Dyrrhachium and Apollonia, of course, that's on the road from Brundisium, where the Roman fleet, one of the 2 Roman fleets, were on the way to the Via Egnatia to reach Macedonia. And it's and you see again that there is a peak at the turn of the 2nd and the 1st century BC, the time of Mithridates or after there is a very large peak. I will not, I sum up the situation for let's say for the Mithridatic conflict, and I was imprudent enough. I'm imprudent enough here just to propose some estimates in terms of ton of silver. So making the game with multiplying every die by 20,000, and we can contest. But in my mind, you can multiply that number of 20,000 by 2 or divide it by 2, which may look frightening, but not by 3, or you cannot multiply or divide by 3. So it gives you some idea, and certainly a relative idea, because it's always the same average which is used. And you see that the big amounts are in the north. 100 tons of silver for the Dyrrhachium Apollonia, that's more than Thasos and Maronea, that's more than for Aeschylus. And then you have discrete things, Lucullus in Athens, the Achaean League, Lucullus in Crete, Pompey, Murena and Pompey in Cappadocia, that's nearly nothing. Pompey in Arados and Laodicea, it's anecdotic. But it gives you an idea. For Athens, Athens is the Stephanophoric coinage of Athens has been considered, and even recently, as the counter-argument, as the only coinage for which we can be sure that it is for trade. It's commercial because it has been found in Delos, which is the trade place by excellence. Thank you, but Muito obrigado. Muito obrigado. But actually, even for Athens, at a very, very, very minimum, there are two moments, and actually not unimportant, for which the Athenian coinage was surely produced for the Romans. We do have 4 consecutive years, that's in the 120s, 120s, for which nearly all the coins of these 4 years, consecutive years, have been found only in Macedonia or in Thrace, in let's say, northern Greece and Bulgaria now, not anywhere else. So who was able just to make sure that the full production of Athens for 4 consecutive years reached the northern Greece, where the Roman legions were? I think the answer is rather evident. It must be the Roman. And if you look at what we call the Lucullian issue, which is this one with these monograms, the 2 monograms for Marcus Tameus Lucullus, the Quaestor Lucullus. If you take that and you compare the volume, the original volume of production, we are nearly an order of magnitude above what has been normally produced during a normal year during the Athenian coinage. And then also, you know, these, if you, I don't know if I no, I don't have that. But if you correlate this curve here with the curve for Roman Republican denarii, it's exactly the opposite. For more than 40 years, when there is a low production in Athens, there is a high production in Rome. When there is a high production in Athens, there is a low production in Athens. And that's also the time where a lot of there is a very low production during these years, which are exactly the years of Aristonicus, after the legacy of the kingdom of Attalus. So let's say that at a very minimum, the Athenian production was instrumentalized by the Romans, and sometimes, but it could be more generally. In terms of monetized, so it gives you the important coinages of the time. In terms of monetized, I'm reading volume and taking into account all the coinages struck in continental Greece from about 150 to 50 BC by cities and leagues in silver and bronze, there is no gold. Leaving aside the sole exception of the debatable case of Athens, it turns out that the coins for the Romans are largely predominant, at least 80%. So there is nearly nothing from the leagues, the cities in Greece during that time, which have been struck for the cities. It's really Roman coinages. And so the idea is that the Romans imitated the Hellenistic kings, and the Hellenistic kings imitated the Persians. And that's my last point. It's just to give you, and that's, and I'm very happy just to have this perfect opportunity just to gather different researches, published or unpublished, and most of what I will present you now are still unpublished but presented in conferences. It's just to give a picture for the Persian. What did the Persian? It's really, the model is Persian. It's not Greek, it's Persian. Mostly, let's say. Let's start with the Cyclades. So, as I mentioned, there were a huge concentrated strike during the years 520, 480, just the moment of the Persians. The Persians were defeated in Salamine in 480, and just by coincidence, they disappeared. Look at, again, these slides you have already seen. It's really a concentrated phenomenon. It's nice to think about islands as the perfect trade places because it's easy to trade by sea. But if you look at the pattern, the chronological pattern, it doesn't fit at all. And I'm strongly, at the same time exactly, you have the same peak, which will not be reproduced after that, in the Thraco-Macedonian area, around the Panjin already, and that's exactly, and there's a new PhD about that by Alexandros Stamalis, it's not published yet, who tied the chronological scope. It's really 520, 480. And the idea is that these coins, which are found in many hordes in Egypt, in the Levant, were considered as the perfect proof of trade. Now, Olivier Picard, Tsamalis, and the others think that there were payment for the Persian, for troops under Persian rule, and they came back home with that silver. And so if you look at this is the Mediterranean, you have Sardes, and playing with some numbers, again, using the value, the comfortable, if not secure value of 20,000 coins per Others die, you see that we do have two big productions in the years before, and corresponding with the Persian Wars, actually, and that's a lot of silver. That's in terms of talents. That's in terms of tons of silver. That's a lot of money, and we do have the impression that, but that's a bit. I will not push that too much. I mean, but we do have the impression that the Persians made preparations and they assure their bases before to invade Greece with Marathon and Salamine. It looks really like the two tongues of a dispositive. And I could argue because for the Cyclades, it's only the production is concentrated on the external island, not on the internal. It's really, sorry, with my finger it will not help, but it's really these Terra, Sifnos, Melos, or not these islands. It's really these islands which have been the place for a heavy strike. And after 480, the rare strikes were no more there. It was just in the middle, or we don't observe this pattern. And we spoke, that's the paper, that's for Haim, you have to. We do have now 3 die studies. One is missing, it's Arwat, Arados, but we do have die studies now for the Phoenician cities, for Sidon, Tyre, and Byblos. And if we look at the rhythm of this production, it's exactly what the author of these die studies, José Telaï, is mentioned. It doesn't fit at all with what she's saying in terms of economic prosperity. So it's at the moment where, for Sidon, it's really conspicuous, and for Tyre, so it doesn't fit with a trade model, and of course. These coinages, where we know that the Phoenicians were supposed to be reputed for trade, but they only started to strike in, let's say, 450, and the 450 slate, but exactly the moment where we are informed about Greek mercenary. So again, but let's say that it doesn't fit with trade. I have that's a book actually on in preparation about Pontic cities, and it's mainly two: Minsk, Sinop, and Amisos, Samsun. Trapezoid is a very minor thing, and then the pattern is that we only have big silver coins, no small silver coins, no bronze coins. So to go to the market to proceed to your daily transaction, it's not very convenient, not at all. And then we have, of course, this text, and we can read it. It's in the pseudo-Aristotle, but we do have in Frontinus, the stratagems of Frontin it's in Polyanus, sorry. There is a similar text. Datamass, and we do have kinds of synopy with datamass. We do have also kinds with an other Karanoi. Karanoi is the commander-in-chief in the Persian system, and that's in Aramaic. Datamass, the Persian, having soldiers under his command, could supply their daily needs for the enemy's countries, but having no money to give them and being requested to pay them, it's always a good idea to pay your mercenaries. When the time came at which it was due, he devised the following plan. He called together an assembly and told them that he had no lack of money, but that it was in a certain place which he named. He therefore moved his camp and started to march thither. Then, when he was near the place, he went in advance to it and took from the temples there all the embossed silver plate which they contained. He then loaded his mules so that the silver plate was visible and they looked as though they were carrying silver, and continued the march. The soldiers, when they saw it, thought that the loads were all solid silver and were encouraged, thinking that they would receive their pay. But Datamass, and that's the important point, but Datamass told them that he must go to Amisos and have the silver minted, because he cannot. So he had the jewelry. He took a lot of beauty to a temple, but then you have to pay your troops, and to pay your troops, they are at that time they wanted real coins. So he had to go to a mint, and he went to Amisos, and then he was able to convert the silver into coins, and everybody was happy. And more recently, I devoted a general study about what happened in Pamphylia and Cilicia. And we have there, that's in red, a certain number of mints, actually a dozen, not really a dozen, but 10, which struck coins during the 4th century. You have it's just a sample of the types you can have. Some could look Persians. Some looks very civic, and all they are civic inscriptions. So religions are referring to cities. And then I give a list of 14 reasons why it cannot be civic. They were produced at a high level. I mean, it's not every item, not every reason is convincing in itself, but some are convincing per se, and the gathering of all these reasons makes not more than a strong presumption, I think. And so, but just to remind that in what we call the economics of what is named the economics of whom we called the pseudo-Aristotle, it said that the satrapal, that to strike coins is the privilege of a king, not of a satrap, not of a city, and certainly not of a domestic level. You can see the different reasons. But then, for the Persians, we do have something like that. And my feeling is that every time you consider an area, you find that these civic coinages are not civic. I'm leaving aside, I have also a dice study for Cyzicus. Cyzicus is clearly not for, I mean, that's a coinage under it was produced, it was a deal between the Persians and or Athens for a while, but mainly for the Persians and Cyzicus to produce this coinage. But it fits as well. But you see, in Pontus, pseudo-civic coinages not for trade but for Persians. In Traco-Macedonian, I think that for Pontus and for Pamphylia and Cilicia, it's pretty sure. For Aegean, I would say as well. For Thrace is less secure, but it seems to me likely. And for the Phoenician cities, Sidon, Tyre, and Byblos, it's not for trade. It doesn't fit. Now it looks like, but we don't know too much. And so, and that's my only. It's the best of my technological skills. Chaim, you see that I'm really need lessons from you. Of course you know that the word paradigm shifts has been abused, and so I'm not on the first degree using them. But I really think that there is, if you consider things, that's an important turn, let's say, is that during the last decades, and Andy Meadows is producing other studies about during Hellenistic times, exactly proving the same thing for Pamphylia or Caria, that all these civic coinages, they are mostly, it's not entirely, they were not created often, but mostly the bulk of these coinages were used by a higher level of power than the civic power. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much. And now I open for questions. Perguntas?
I have a wicked question. You have managed for your coinages to produce mercenaries.
Sorry, I'm not sure to hear you.
You've managed for each of your coinages, you produce an episode with warfare or mercenaries. Are there episodes of warfare where you don't have a coinage?
Excellent question. Yeah, but for Mithridates, as I mentioned, the building of a fleet. So for Mithridates, you can really play very in details. And as I mentioned, for example, during the winter 1989, we have literary records saying that he spent a lot of time, he spent a lot of energy just to build a fleet, and we have no coinage. And that's also an interesting, another example I failed to present here. For Mithridatic times, a very important coinage is the coinage of Tigranes of Armenia. Tigranes of Armenia was taken as, he grew up as an hostage of the Parthians, but in 95 he was reinstalled on the throne of the Armenian throne. And we know that from historical sources that he was very aggressive, he was involved with many wars, let's say. No coins. No coins. Why no coins? Because we know that, because the only coins we do have for Mithridates have on the reverse the wonderful sculpture statue of the Tyche of Eutychides of Sicyon in Antioch, the emblematic sculpture of Antioch. What happened is that in 83 he defeated. He was the master of. He defeated the last Seleucid, and he was the master of Antioch. And what most likely happened is that we know that the last Seleucid had Greek mercenaries at their service. And what most likely happened is that he said to these Greek mercenaries, okay, that was your, now I will pay you just to do the same. Just go with me. You are part no more of the Seleucid army, you are part of the Armenian army. And so you see that that's a coinage for which you have a king with an aggressive military policy without coins for the first part of his reign, but that's possibly without Greek mercenaries. Then he took Antioch, he started to strike coins, because the motive, the iconography of a reverse, and then, oh, by chance, it's exactly the time when he is likely to have taken the Greek mercenaries at his service, that he started to strike coins. So that's, again, I have to refrain to be systematic, but it seems really that the strong link is not only between coinages and military purposes, it's really between coinages and mercenaries. if it's with a national army, let's say, the Second World War, the Second Mithridatic War, the Second Mithridatic War, we know that Mithridates was really aggressed. He was in his kingdom. He was Murena, made some raids in Pontus. He had no time. He failed to employ any mercenaries, and there is no coinage for Mithridates during the so-called Second Mithridatic War. What we do have, it's a peak for Philoramaios in Cappadocia, because Murena used possibly the coins to pay his legion troops. So it's, but you can think, the best example, David, is just, it's never said, but that's the core of the Greek world. You have Sparta and Athens. Sparta, no coins. Athens, such a big coinage. The big coinage, the bulk of the coinage, nobody dared to do a die study so far because it's so huge, and with a new hoard of 40,000 coins, Athenian ores, it would be feasible, I think. It's the second part of the 5th century, which is exactly the time of the Peloponnese War. What's the difference between Athens and Sparta? Sparta, there is no mercenary. Yeah, it's a civic army. So with Sparta, I know we have to be careful because possibly they use the tortoises, produce Aeginis, not. There are some possibilities that the genetic coinage of the tortoises were not used for Aegina or at that time during the 5th century. It's an hypothesis made by several, but it's in private comments like that. But again, it would, for the main thing, Sparta, Athens, it fits. It fits with Phoenicia. It's only with when we are aware of the arrival of Greek mercenaries that these trade cities started to strike coins. But again, having said that, the important thing is not to be systematic, otherwise you are counterproductive.
Question about quantification. How much do we really believe about die links?
Die links?
Die links, you know, I mean, you're basing all the quantification based on die link studies.
Yes.
And I'm really became very skeptic about this die link study, because taking, for instance, the Phoenician coinage. You know, you take José Telaï's work, it's based on poor quality photographs. And I've been working with Oren on a hoard that has only 293 Phoenician coins. And I can tell you that making a die study for just checking 10 coins takes me like maybe a week.
I published reviews of all your books saying that die links are not well properly done, so I published that. But my feeling is that, from my own experience, I check every die study I have seen, could be in a PhD or in a book, and just trying, if I'm seeing exactly the same thing as the author. And I would say that in 95% of the cases, we see the same thing, possibly with 1 or 2 differences, but it's marginal. There are some cases for which I don't see the same thing, and I will not produce here the list, but José Telaï is clearly a case. Maria Cacamo is another. Sorry, it's another. So that's problematic. But most of the time, it's not. Most of the time, we are seeing exactly the same thing. And hopefully there are some die studies made, different die studies made about the same coinage, and you have the same results. So I think, yes, there is a question of interpretation in that, and of course we are hoping that there will be a system, and it's on its way. It's actually there are money involved just to produce that. Thomas Fauché is really trying to do that, but we don't have to exaggerate the uncertainties. Mm-hmm. What is much more embarrassing, I think, for die studies is the fact to see if the die has been engraved again or recut or not. Because then, if you are looking at the literature, there are two possibilities. There are authors who are saying for which recuts are unknown. There is no recuts, and there are authors which looks as obsessed with recuts, and they are seeing recuts everywhere. So that's really something more embarrassing. But again, I would not be to use this level of uncertainty and of which exist through the baby with the bath. I think that's really exaggeration. So
Don't throw the baby without the bath, but the question is how these dye studies are done.
I think most
they're
of them.
just checking photographs.
From my own experience, checking, and I check every time from my.
But just checking from your.
No, but you know when you receive a PhD with a full coverage of all these, and with Olivier Picard, I had 30 PhD, for which I have and you are checking everything. We see.
But
the
you're
same
checking
thing.
it just from looking at the coins.
Yes. What?
No, because what I've been doing is superimposing the photographs.
It doesn't work. I mean,
No, if you have them photographed by the same photographer on the same.
No, I'm not sure, because Tony Atkins asked to the Zeiss company in Halle, that's it, in Halle, Jena, Jena, to build what he called a comparateur de coin. Beatrice has, so it was in a specific room in Louvain-la-Neuve. So you have two plates, you put 2 coins on the two plates, and then you have a binocular, and and then with coins struck with the same dice, absolutely, you have differences, really. So it's marked in blue or in red. So even with real coins, it's tricky. With photographs, I'm not sure. It's not better than your eyes. My own experience is that it's not an improvement. Because every coin will be. It's what is really important. But we are very technical here. What is really important is is really the position of the motifs with the dots and the hair. And but then if it's the cheek is more that could appear as very different, but actually it's struck by the same coin, the same others or reverse. So
I still think it's very confusing.
Yeah. I don't think so.
Mr. François, thank you very much for your presentation. Very inspirational. This is not a question, but a comment. Your presentation gives me a lot of insight in trying to understand, and I've been studying that for a while, why the starters from Aspendos have a Pamphilian legend that would not make a lot of sense if they were used for trade, and how frequently they're countermarked. I think it makes sense to what you are presenting. And I have more than 200 of those coins with a huge variety of countermarks. And the legend in Pamphilian, for me, didn't make sense if that would be like a trade city. They should not use that language that was only spoken in that very small area for international trade.
And I published in French a long time ago a long paper of 50 pages about the countermarks on Aspendos and Nagidos and Cide. And you can prove that some countermarks were done in the mint, not after circulation, in the mint. So it's a bit tricky with the idea that a countermark is a re-evaluation of a coinage with a retarification with a new value. No. In Cilicia and Pamphylia, no. So,
Thank you.
Any more questions? Sure.
François, your first date is 5/20.
for the Cyclades, or
Yes.
yeah,
and before, what do you think?
for the electrum
For the
coinage.
100 years of your archaic coinage.
But you mean for
many
the electrum phases?
Not the electrum, but many other Athens minted before 520 and...
No, it's not absolutely sure. No, but Athens is not linked with the Persians. But
the Achaean towns in southern Italy.
Yeah, no, that's and indeed, there is a brilliant article, recent paper by Keith Rutter for the birth of coinage in Sicily, and it's really interesting since it's not coordinated. He showed very convincingly that you have the first. So it was first 5 mints, then 7 mints. Syracuse was not among the first, and they all are different by the fabric. They all are different by the types. Okay, never mind. By the metrological system. So it looks really like as it was everybody tried on his own just to produce a coinage. So it's really that's a really methodological important paper.
Where was it published?
Good question. I have the paper at home. I could.
Send me a PDF.
I think it's in some Scottish, not numismatic.
I'll ask him. Yeah. Okay.
So,
anyhow, it's.
No, but
your lecture was very provoking and kept me thinking all the time. And
I think the important thing is not to reason about just one coinage. You have to take the full pattern. And when you take the full pattern, it becomes a bit clearer.
Okay. Yes. Thanks.
Any more questions? No?
A bit
So-
very assertive.
Lots of questions.
Questions? David,
So,
still a question? So,
Oh, sorry. I'd like your opinion on a later period. You're dealing with silver coinages, and there's a shift suddenly in Rome with Caesar, and particularly after Caesar's death, they're starting quite clearly to produce bronze coinages to pay the troops. The Divos Julius in northern Italy, Pompey in Sicily, and things like that. Have you any ideas about why there should have been this shift from using silver coinage to bronze in Rome after the death of Caesar?
I know, if I had the perfect explanation, I would be very happy because it's a very major issue. And what is, I just made I was asked to make a general contribution for the Black Sea. Actually, the turn in between the late Hellenistic times and the Roman times, not Republican, but the beginning of the empire in Thrace and along the Black Sea. And what has been repeatedly advocated during the last 10 years, which was not before, is that the Romans they didn't replace a system. Because in Greece, they stopped to most of the time there were no more coinages since decades when the Romans came and passed from the silver to the bronze, because gold was not for the cities and not for... so there is a gap in between, really a gap. So, and then, of course, just to pass from... what is important just to... that's for a question for the provincial issues, is that the Romans, they left the cities, express themselves through wonderful coinages with wonderful types, but in terms of value, it was nothing. It was extremely ephemeral as well. So these cities, if the question is, are these coinages Greek imperials or provincial Roman provincials? You can argue both ways. Everything referring to types, to cults, to mythology, it's Greek. Metrology is Greek, if we may understand something in that. But in terms of economic importance, it's Roman, but it means the Romans kept, they just left the world of the Greek cities with just amuse yourself producing coinages. And then, of course, in terms of identity, and it's really important, and there are a lot of work, but no more in terms of economics. It's
Any more questions? So, thank you so much once again.
Resumindo, né, são momentos de encerramento, né, hora de dar tchau, né, como diriam, né. Rapidamente, antes de tudo, mais uma vez, agradecimentos, não é, Cris? Quando Cristina, Adriene Tacla, que infelizmente não está presente, e eu nos reunimos pela primeira vez e começamos a engendrar a ideia do evento, nós tínhamos em mente de fazer um evento bastante plural, não é? E que congregasse todas as frentes que, de certa forma, se relacionassem com a numismática. E eu chego ao final do evento feliz, porque eu acredito que tenhamos conseguido reunir um grupo muito heterogêneo, digamos assim, mas que, de todo modo, representou aquilo que significa estudar a moeda, de uma forma ou de outra. Seja pelo viés da história, seja pelo viés da educação, seja pelo viés da tecnologia, e seja pelo viés da moeda em si mesma, não é? Que é muito importante também destacar. Então, eu chego ao final dessa jornada bastante agradecido, não é? Bastante realizado. Esse é o primeiro, agora vamos lutar para desenvolver o segundo e assim não perder mais de vista. Quero agradecer imensamente a presença de todos os colegas, professores que aqui vieram, os convidados, os nossos convidados do exterior que aqui vieram também. She's translating. They understand everything now in Portuguese. I'm sure about that. Eu quero agradecer muito também todos os alunos que nos apoiaram demais, né? Sem a força dos alunos, nós não teríamos conseguido realizar o evento. E, mais uma vez, agradecer muito o apoio que tivemos do nosso museu, não é, Cris? Se não fosse o apoio que tivemos de todos os funcionários que se envolveram, da direção, que nos apoiou imensamente, com extrema boa vontade, sentamos na mesa e eles disseram, estamos juntos, o que vocês precisam? E nós precisávamos naquela ocasião de muitas coisas, e porque nós não tivemos a felicidade de ter o apoio da CAPES e CNPq, nós tivemos só PROAP e FAPESP num primeiro momento, que para um evento que se configurou dessa grandeza, precisávamos de mais verba naquela ocasião, né? Agradeço todo o apoio, agradeço, né, também em nome da Cristina e da Adriene, todo o apoio recebido nesse sentido, que sem esse apoio nós não teríamos tido o sucesso que nós obtivemos aqui, né? É só ligar, o botãozinho está... É só apertar, aperta. Isso.
É o contrário, eu fiz o contrário, Cleberson. Queria te agradecer, que ajudou a coordenou, né, conosco. Muito obrigada. Mais uma vez, né, lembrar que é um primeiro homenagem à pessoa que começou esse processo aqui no Brasil, que é a professora Maria Beatriz Borba Florenzano. Of course.
On behalf of the Four Musketeers, I'd like to say, first of all, thank you very much for the invitation. Thank you very much for putting up with us. It's been very interesting for us to see what exciting work is being done here, even if not all of us have understood everything. It's been very inspiring, and yeah, it's great to see what's happening here. But above all, we'd like to say thank you for the food, which is, I have to go back and get a Brazilian cookery book, I think, and see if I can get some of these ingredients the other side of the Atlantic. But I'd like to say thank you very, very much for the Brazilian hospitality. You've been absolutely fantastic hosts. You've looked after us very well, and whether we'll feel the same after we've made complete idiots of ourselves at Samba this evening, I don't know, but just thank you to everyone in the audience, and thank you to the two of you, and thank you, Beatrice, for actually making these people what they are today. Thank you very much.
Consideramos oficialmente encerrado o nosso primeiro congresso. Obrigado, pessoal.